Hello there everybody, we are back with the dreadful Jacob Rees-Mogg on his GB News show, and I'm genuinely beginning to believe the producers of the show are trying to stitch him up. Brace yourself to watch the Victorian throwback being completely humiliated by Novara Media's Michael Walker on the subjects of climate change and net zero. But before I play this, please take time to read the letter from the National Infrastructure Commission that this entire debate hinges on, so you can receive the full picture of both Jacob Rees-Mogg and the Telegraph's deceit when it comes to the conclusions to be drawn from the letter. Because, to say the very least, this is cherry-picking of epic magnitudes. I will post a link to the letter in the description below. It is worth noting, by the way, the NIC sent the letter to Oliver Dowden and Therese Coffey, so we can expect virtually nothing to come of it. Perhaps Coffey will use it as a napkin and Dowden as toilet paper. But anyway, without further ado, here is Michael Walker edging himself ever closer to being blackballed from Jacob Rees-Mogg's show.
In the drive to protect ourselves from climate change, we are making ourselves more susceptible to climate change. The catch 2050, if you will. The National Infrastructure Commission has warned that dependence on decarbonised electricity systems increases risks like storm damage to overhead wires, which could become more disruptive. The energy derived from wind is supplied to homes and businesses through overhead cables, while traditional fuels like gas are connected through pipelines underground. They caution that a failure to adapt infrastructure could leave the UK vulnerable to power outages. Wind currently accounts for around a quarter of the UK's electricity supply. The expectation is that this will almost double by 2050. Continuing on to state the obvious, the NIC said low wind could disrupt power supplies as the UK's reliance on wind turbines increased. If being left cold in your home, perhaps unable to cook or even charge your car for periods doesn't appeal, then why are we persisting down this path? Stephen, this is a story that came from the Telegraph, your paper. Are we taking a risk without realising what we're doing? Are we willing the end without working out the means to get there?
I think the problem with net zero is that it's just not well thought out. So, for example, if we do have power outages because of storms and things, and suddenly everyone's got an electric car, how are you going to charge your car? How are you going to get to work? How are you going to go out about your business? If you have an electric heat pump, for example, instead of a gas boiler, this could cause problems again. If there's power outage, you can't use, your shower or whatever. So as we make this transition to net zero, there's all these unintended consequences that could happen. And I think we're going far too quickly, and we're not considering all of these other problems that could come up.
And Michael, do you think it will maintain public support if we have power outages, if people are cold, and that therefore trying to go too fast ends up being counterproductive?
Yeah, I suppose I just want to point out, because we're getting this story from a Telegraph article, right? That's what the producer sent me.
But it's from the National Infrastructure
But this is what's
Commission.
interesting. So I saw the headline in the Telegraph. So it was, net zero will leave UK more vulnerable to power cuts caused by storms. People could be left sitting in cold homes or unable to charge cars. National Infrastructure Commission warns. Then I went to their website, so the National Infrastructure Commission website, and this is how they summarised the letter. National Infrastructure Commission call for urgent action to protect infrastructure from climate risks. So the letter to the government was to say, look, climate change is going to bring with it lots of risks, such as more severe storms and more severe heat, and therefore we need to adapt to that. And now this has been twisted by the Telegraph to say trying to mitigate against climate change is what's going to cause us problems.
It's another cost for the taxpayers, another £10 billion a year on top of the climate change charges, which already make our electricity 25% more expensive than...
But we will need to do this either way. So basically what they're saying, right, they are saying that climate change itself is going to cause us to have a more insecure energy system.
But not if we carry on using gas, because that goes in pipelines.
Well, we can't use gas for everything, right? So the situation... So their argument...
We use gas for a lot of things.
So what they're saying is, look... Increased storms, increased severe weather, which we are more likely to see because of climate change, risks more power outages when it comes to electricity. Now, whether or not we move to electric cars, whether or not we move to heat pumps, that's going to be a problem. No one wants power outages. So what they're saying is, what we should do is invest in putting some of these cables underground or cut some trees from nearby pylons, so when there's extreme storms,
they do that
doesn't knock
anyway.
that down.
And that-
Well, they're saying let's do more of it, essentially. Right. What they're saying is that climate change is real. It's a huge challenge. It's making us all more vulnerable. And so we need to deal with it. They've also said that, yes, if we use more electricity for things such as cars and heat pumps, then it makes protecting our energy grid even more important than it was before. But protecting the energy grid is always important. And the fact is, what they're saying is that climate change is the threat, not action to mitigate against climate change. I just think it's very bizarre, this framing.
Except they're going much further than the IPCC, which pointed out in its recent report that the number of hurricanes and so on in the US hasn't changed over 100 years, and that actually the ability to link all these events to climate change is not invariably proved. So there's a lot of propaganda that we're getting.
I think the point that Michael is making is partly true in the sense that these organisations don't disagree with net zero as a policy. They do agree with net zero. They're making points about, as you say, climate change causing more severe weather, but also the fact that we're not adapting quickly enough to these net zero policies. So, these overhead cables could cause problems if we do have power outages because of the electric cars, because of the electric heat pumps. So yeah, I mean, look,
It's not strictly because of them. So if you have a power outage, that's already a big problem.
You're more vulnerable.
You're more vulnerable because now you can fill your car up with petrol.
Exactly.
And so your car still works.
I want to go back to your IPCC claim, to be honest, because one, I mean, none of us here are climate scientists. I think you have a very bad record of trying to summarise IPCC reports. You said in 2014 that the IPCC said action won't have any effect until a century. And I think your sort of comment on that was, so what's the point?
I'm delighted that you remember my comments from 2014.
That's because you're a former energy minister. You're a significant public figure. And I think you have a terrible record when it comes to communicating the dangers of climate change. And I think you're doing the same here. So the IPCC...
I think this was in their report, actually.
What the IPCC say... No, so in the report that you got wrong, they were saying it will if we don't take action now, we're going to live with that for over 100 years. You said it's not going to have any effect till over 100 years, which is obviously wrong. Now, in terms of
I can't remember. We need to look at the report. I'm not going to accept your interpretation of what I said 10 years ago.
In terms of the extreme weather events, every single scientific body, the Met Office, the IPCC, says we are going to see, and we are already seeing, more extreme weather events.
But they did also say in their last report that there was the same number of hurricanes in the US.
In what period of time?
From now to 100 years ago.
From now to 100 years ago.
That was in their latest report.
In the US, are they stronger now? Because, I mean, if you look at all of them, I mean, again, at the moment we are seeing this week, the highest temperature they have ever witnessed in Thailand, 45 degrees. And because it's humid, that feels like 54 degrees. So that's probably going to kill people. Last year in this country, we saw temperatures above 40 degrees. Before that, the record was 38.7, and that was just a couple of years before that. So the idea that you're still in 2023 sitting here saying that, does climate change really cause extreme weather? I mean, we've moved on from this.
I'm not saying that climate change isn't a thing. I'm just saying, how do you deal with it in a way that people are going to be willing to pay for in a timescale that is practical? And I think 2050 is too short a timescale and too expensive.
I think that's the problem is this 2050, this net zero policy. It goes too quickly, it goes too far, it's utopian, it's almost Stalinist in having these kind of, these long-term plans. And you don't consider the actual impacts on ordinary people's lives. I mean, these costs could be immense for very, working class, ordinary Brits. For example, installing an electric heat pump. This could cost thousands of pounds for ordinary people. Electric cars, again, the technology isn't there. It's very, very expensive, these cars. Why can't we just stick
They're not in China, actually. They've made a very cheap electric car.
Thank you to my panel. I don't think anybody will vote in the end to be cold and poor. But up next, we'll be hearing a very personal and tragic story from the...
Well, I don't know about you, but I thoroughly enjoyed that. Of course, it goes without saying Rees-Mogg is one of the biggest climate change deniers in Parliament. And there are many, but he is one of the most extreme. There are scales to this, though. It is entirely possible to accept climate change is real, but be against the push towards net zero for economic reasons. That is actually a position some reasonable conservatives take, and these people can be debated in good faith. But Rees-Mogg is just an out-and-out climate change denier, purely, I suspect, for personal financial reasons. He is a huge proponent of fracking, for example, and likely has a significant vested interest in releasing as much shale gas as possible. I'm pretty sure I've heard him describe the UK before as sitting on a gold mine when asked about fracking. So Rees-Mogg is an entirely bad faith actor. And the case in point, this deceitful presentation of a letter sent to the government by the NIC warning of the effects climate change could have on our infrastructure, but dressing it up instead as the push for net zero will cause people to freeze in their own homes. I mean, my goodness, it's one of the most despicable underhand tactics you will ever see, but completely befitting of Jacob Rees-Mogg. Thank goodness somebody as savvy and wise as Michael Walker was on the panel on this occasion to nip this crap in the bud in real time. And to think Jacob Rees-Mogg was once an energy minister. Truly horrifying. Oh dear. Anyway, thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye.